cookie?
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
That's your money saying it's time for a McDonald's run. Because with new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect. Like buy a 6-piece McNuggets and add a McChicken for just $1. Your money says let's go. Get more than you expect with new McValue. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
You know that feeling when someone shows up for you just when you need it most? That's what Uber is all about. Not just a ride or dinner at your door. It's how Uber helps you show up for the moments that matter. Because showing up can turn a tough day around or make a good one even better. Whatever it is, big or small, Uber is on the way. So you can be on yours. Uber, on our way.
Justin, yeah, just hold on a minute. No, I can see him. How's he looking? Yeah, well, he's still wearing his Palace shirt for yesterday. Oh, he's just raised it. He's got a tattoo. It says "I love Righty," but without the W. I'm a bit concerned. But yeah, no. Stand down, Justin. Can I put you on hold for 3 weeks' time, just in case? Okay. Cheers, mate. Ta-ra.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game of me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. That's very good comedy acting there, Kieran. Excellent. You told me you had a little surprise, and it was I think I've raised you up. I used to write the ad-libs for Gary Lineker, and I feel I've done the same job for you, Kieran. I feel like I've taken the stabiliser wheels off your bike, and you can do your own funny stuff now. I hear, Kieran, there are a few games in some Mickey Mouse competition called the Premier League yesterday. Apparently, I hear. Were you involved in one of those? Yeah.
I was one of the I was one of the 18,000 who saw Brighton beat West Ham with 2 goals in the last 3 minutes, because a load of people decided on 83 minutes to depart. And I was chastising them, but I have been advised apparently that there's a lot of Catholics amongst the Brighton support, and in tipping the hat to the passing of Il Papa, a load of them decided to pull out before the end. And therefore that's their justification in not seeing us turn the game around.
You're on fire today. A very dear friend of mine, who's a West Ham fan, just made his day. That the fact he said I could live with you winning, but the fact that we thought we were going to beat Brighton up until Brighton woke up at the end. We were discussing though, talking to the Pope's funeral. Obviously, Prince William was supposed to be at Wembley and found himself at the Pope's funeral. We're wondering whether he gave his ticket back through the official Villa source. Would Prince William have gone on to StubHub, you reckon, or sold it to a mate?
He might. If any man's got a hotline to Todd Bowley, it's got to be the Prince, isn't it? So perhaps he could have maximised out through that particular vehicle.
We just like the idea of Prince William getting a letter from Aston Villa saying you've failed 3 games in a row you've missed now. We're taking that season ticket on. Still don't understand why Prince William doesn't support Palace. It's just ridiculous.
Exactly.
Maybe he thought growing up, maybe he thought a Villa would be, that's a bit more immodest. It's questions day, Kieran. I'm tempted to ask how much you get for being in the final of the FA Cup, but that would be asking for a friend, obviously. But we've got some good questions, and also we're keeping ourselves. It's quite a short questions pod, this, Kieran, because as you can imagine, my energy levels are not what they could be on this sunny Sunday lunchtime, and also we're keeping ourselves fresh for the inevitable questions about Sheffield Wednesday that we get from our South Yorkshire audience tomorrow night. So our first question today, Kieran, you weren't really on the phone to Justin Moore. You haven't got Justin Moore, have we? That was acting, wasn't it? I'm getting paranoid.
I might have Justin More's number. You never know. As an accountant, you always have to have backup plans.
Well, that's true. He's a Man United fan. He wouldn't be very happy. Certainly won't be happy now at half time at Bournemouth. Ross Antill has our first question, Kieran. And Ross Antill says, in terms of the Premier League's PSR limits, if the 105 million agreed in 2013 had risen with inflation, and currently the Bank of England inflation calculation would give you 141 million, would so many clubs now be in trouble? Has the Premier League shot itself in the foot by not increasing this figure with inflation, as football wages, transfers, etc. seem to have increased by more than base rate inflation? Or is this not a relevant factor? I mean, it's 12 years since those figures were set, Kieran. So I think it's a very sensible question from Ross there, isn't it?
It is. It's something which we have discussed at length before, because CPI, consumer price inflation, bears no resemblance to the activities of a niche industry. And that's what professional football is. So Ross is exactly correct that if you increase with just the CPI, it would go to £141 million. And from my understanding, there was a request from Aston Villa earlier this year to increase the allowable loss for PSR from 105 to 135 million. And that seems fair. And yet that was rejected. Now, why is it rejected? It's because all decisions are being made on a self-interest, short-term basis. So, yes, it makes sense from Villa's perspective. The Aston Villa owners have invested heavily in players, in coaching staff, and so on. They've not managed to increase matchday revenues as much as they would like, because there is resistance to price increases, although some of the prices for the Champions League matches in particular were quite steep. So I got out my trusty spreadsheet, and what I did is I said, right, okay, why was this figure of £105 million introduced in the first place? Done a lot of research. It just appears to be a number plucked from nowhere. So I said, right, well, if it was deemed to be sustainable, then let's look at it in terms of metrics. And the losses of £105 million, based on the revenues of a club in 2013, were 29.4%. So what the Premier League said is that if you are to be sustainable, you are allowed to lose 29.4% of the total money that you bring in. But if we move that forwards to the most recent set of financials, that 29.4 drops to 14.1%. So say, well, oh, hold on. If the Premier League was saying that 29.4% is a valid figure, let's work that out based on current revenues. And according to my figures, clubs should be allowed to lose £218 million over 3 years, and they would be in exactly the same position as they were in 2013. And those clubs who have an advantage over the others, because they were allowed to spend more money over a decade ago, due to history, due to the fact that it was the start of the century, the first decade and the first few years of the next decade as well. Clubs, Manchester City benefited from this, Chelsea benefited, and all of the bigger clubs benefited substantially in those years. Why shouldn't those clubs that want to be challengers, who are ambitious, who want to be part of that top six, why can't they lose that same amount of money? It's because the big six clubs vote against it because they don't want competition. We then Ross said, has the Premier League shot itself in the foot? And I do think that I absolutely understand where Ross is coming from here, but I think there is a common misconception. The Premier League does not dictate policy. Policy is actually determined at the monthly meetings of Premier League chief executives. And the Premier League might put forward a suggestion, but it cannot have that decision-making ability itself. So Richard Masters, ultimately, his responsibility is to act on the decisions made by the 20 chief executives. And there wasn't enough support for Aston Villa's proposal to get that through. So I think it is a relevant factor that he's raised. It does discriminate against I would say Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, Newcastle United, those clubs who have become newly wealthy because their acquisition by billionaire owners and sovereign wealth funds and so on has come at a later point in time. So for me, it's an inconsistency. It's an inconsistency that the Premier League doesn't seem to want to address. You must also separate that from the rules that we have under UEFA. But given that UEFA are only fining clubs that breach the rules, again, I don't really see the UEFA rules as being much of a barrier to increase spending. So, in conclusion, Ross, I agree with you that the rules in their present form are not fit for purpose if they were deemed to be fit for purpose in 2013.
Met a lot of Villa fans yesterday, Kieran, I have to say, before and after the game. Very friendly, very gracious as well. All very furious at Prince William not there. Part-time Prince, they call him now. All right. Funeral or no funeral, you can't miss a semi-final. There's two things there, Kieran. I think a lot of our listeners would be slightly surprised to hear you describe Premier League football as a niche product. I mean, is there a kind of level of income or outcome where you would say something was bigger than niche? Because it's a global game, isn't it?
It's a global game. We think of Premier League clubs as being big. They're not. If you go to the Apple store in Oxford Circus in London, that probably turns over more money than at least half of the Premier. And that's just one store one city.
Wow.
Yeah. So the reason why we think football is big is because it dominates our lives. It dominates the back pages.
Okay.
But if you think about it, there are no listed clubs in the London Stock Exchange as such. Manchester United, admittedly, is on the New York Stock Exchange, but Manchester United, again, is an outlier. If we take a look at the share price of Manchester United currently, comparing that to the Dow Jones Index, Manchester United share price has fallen 10% since 2012, whereas the Dow Jones Index has tripled. So football does not follow the rest of the market. And again, the reason why I say it's a niche industry is that if we take a look at many industries, they are very much servants to broader economic activities. So if you take something such as the car market, when do car sales go up? When do car sales go down? It's when the economy is buoyant and when the economy is struggling. Whereas football, to a certain extent, is recession-proof. And the reason why it's recession-proof, in my view, is we've been through this cliche before. It's the most important of the unimportant things in life. So therefore, it's the last thing. You will make sacrifices as economic times get tougher, but that means going out for entertaining less often, going out for hospitality events, perhaps not taking a holiday. The one thing you don't want to give up is your season ticket. So because it has what we sometimes refer to as sort of inelastic demand, or it's an addictive product. And it's a bit like when economic times are hard, do smokers stop smoking? No, they don't. Why? Because and it is an addictive product. If I gave you a list of 10 things in which you need to give up, your season ticket at Palace will be the last one in terms of what we might call discrete or disposable spending. So that's why, in my view, it is not operating in parallel with the broader economy.
It's similar to when periodically an MP will go, these people aren't poor, they've got a giant screen television. It's because they can't afford to go out. Yes. So they entertain themselves at home is the answer to that. And secondly, Kieran, obviously you mentioned there are different types of inflation. So what's the inflation that we hear about on the news every day? What sort of inflation is that, and how is that different?
Well, the consumer price inflation, what happens is that the civil servants at the Office for Budget Responsibility or similar, they put together a basket of goods. So they will say, what do households spend their money on? So you've got your mortgage, fuel, food, and so on. And they say, well, the average household spends 30% of them weekly money on accommodation, 25% on food, 15% on travel, blah, blah, blah. And then it's got perhaps you're 20% for what we might, it's not fun money. Yeah, we're entitled to enjoyment in life. And the people, again, the MPs that create, why should people who are have the misfortune of not having a job or being ill, why shouldn't they be entitled to some form of pleasure or enjoyment in life? So what it does is that they send out surveys, and on the basis of the information that they get back from the surveys, they tweak that. So broadband, for example, 20 years ago wouldn't have been included because only a small proportion of the population, but everything now is digital. So as social trends change, that is reflected in this basket of goods for the average person living with 1.7 kids as it is now in a house of this size and so on. So it can't fit all, and that's what always makes me twitchy as someone sort of vaguely understood a bit about economics many years ago. We are gentlemen of a certain age. I qualify for a pension in a few years. Well, I know that pensioners' inflation is different to young person's inflation, is different to CPI inflation and so on. But this type of information isn't getting across. So it is based very much on averages, but that's the figure that you will see quoted by Fiona Bruce on the 6 o'clock news or Sophie Rayworth or whoever it's going to be.
All right. Our next question, Kieran, I'm sure you'll be thankful to Albert Brammer, because Albert Brammer's got a lovely, complicated question for you, full of numbers. Albert Brammer says, I'm always interested in player wages. Spotrac has a site that has a reported weekly wages for Premier League footballers, but these numbers cannot be close to the actual wages. For instance, as a fan of Liverpool, and Kieran's nodding his head here, this is clearly the question he's been waiting for. Excuse me. As a fan of Liverpool, congratulations in advance, Albert. Or it won't be now. We're in advance of the Spurs game now, but by the time this goes out, you'll have probably 6 or 7-0 is my guess, which Ange Postecoglou will laugh off in his usual light-hearted manner. For instance, as a fan of Liverpool, their number for 22-23 was 160.9 million. Yet in the published accounts, the total salary for all staff was 329.9 million for 1,008 staff. So as staff includes 701 admin, 69 ground and maintenance, as well as players, managers and coaches, 238, we could work out that the mean salary for each employee would be 170,700, which is ridiculous. My question is what bonuses are paid to players, and are all of the first team squad on bonuses? I mean, there's decent detective work there from Albert, because quite obviously the money isn't spread out between the players as much as it's spread out amongst admin, managers and coaches, is it?
You're exactly right, Albert. Right, I'm now this thing buzzing around my head is a bee in my particular bonnet, because these websites, the likes of Sportrac, and there's another one called Capology, which is always being quoted on social media and mainstream media. And for me, I call it crapology, because it is utter garbage.
Right, okay.
The number, because if you add up the numbers, and I've done exactly the same, and that then gets quoted, and that then becomes gospel, because that's how things happen. It's a bit like the 115 charges, which was actually more than 115 charges. But once it gets into the public consciousness, that these figures started to be quoted. So going back to Albert's question, I don't think the figures in Sportrac are realistic in the first instance. But then looking at his specific questions, what bonuses are paid to players? Well, every contract is different. I mean, whilst there is a standard template for a contract, and are all of the first team squad on bonuses? Effectively, yes. I mean, if you are a first team player who's been recruited on a transfer or come through the academy and you've broken into the first team, especially at Premier League level, you get an appearance bonus in terms of being in the squad. You get an appearance bonus if you actually get on the pitch. You get a win bonus. You get draw bonuses. You get bonuses for every position higher. So, and we've spoken about what we refer to as merit payments in the Premier League. It's worth around about £3.4 million for every position. of which the players will probably be sharing 500,000 of that. You split that between 25 players, so you're effectively on 500,000 divided by 25. You might be on 25,000 bonus for finishing 15th instead of 16th. So every match is incentivized, and that is one of the really good things about the Premier League. Whilst I think there is a perception amongst some fans that there are dead rubbers, the players might be thinking, well, going to the last match of the season, we're 13th, we could get 10th, another 3 or 4 places. That could be worth 100 grand to me. Like, given a choice between having 100 grand and not having 100 grand, can you see that the players are actually very much incentivized? So bonuses are specific from contract to contract. At the upper end of the Premier League and also at the bottom end, there are additional bonuses for avoiding relegation, because an extra season in the Premier League is so valuable. There are also substantial bonuses at the top of the Premier League for qualifying for the Champions League itself, because, as we've established, realistically, that's probably worth a minimum of £40 million before you actually play a match, by the time you take into account your UEFA appearance fee and the fact that you've got 4 home matches, which are going to be sold out. So Premier League contracts, as are all contracts, are significantly incentivized. As for the individual amounts, it's a private contract between 2 parties, and it should remain that. And just going back to Albert's first sentence of his question, which I think it's a valid one, because I'm always interested in player wages. Now, here's a question, Albert. When I go for a meal, am I interested in how much the chef is being paid? How much is the waiter being paid? And yet, as long as they get served me good, I think it's a good place. When I go to a concert, am I interested in how much is Andrew Eldritch from the Sisters of Mercy getting for that particular gig? I'm not. So what sets football apart that we are genuinely intrigued and interested in the wages of sports players, but not others in the world of entertainment, not others in the world of hospitality and so on? And that's not a criticism of Albert's comment, because I think it's a valid comment, because it's one that we hear so often. And is that part of the fact that we've become, not saying indoctrinated, but we have become conditioned by the constant reference to player wages within the media on a daily and weekly basis?
This episode is sponsored by Shopify. When we started The Price of Football and things started to take off, it all got a bit overwhelming at times as we were suddenly sorting out recordings, interviews, live shows, and our online store. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify.
Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With Shopify, you get your own design studio that includes hundreds of ready-to-use templates. You can accelerate your content creation with Shopify's AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. And you can easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify.
Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball, all lowercase. So go to shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business, making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
That's a very good point, actually, because I don't recall many conversations about how much Palace's CEO will be getting paid, or the physio that comes running on the pitch. No one goes, I wonder how much they're getting paid. So it is. I suppose there's probably a complicated cultural reason in that, mainly because players' wages in the past 30 years have exploded so much. Even when we first started watching football, players' wages wouldn't have been that much different to a lot of the people watching them from the terraces. But I suppose, and also I think it's players' wages that fans always think could be spent on something else. It's really interesting, like I say, catching up with Sunderland Till I Die, which was 2017-18. It's really interesting to see their captions about player wages back then, which is like long ago. But the fuss about Jack Rodwell at Sunderland, refusing to, saying he wasn't being picked, but he didn't want to move on because he was getting paid 70 grand a week, and the fans being outraged by him. An outrage that was stoked up by the Sunderland owners and CEOs at the time, who were saying this bloke should move on because his £70,000 a week could bring us in the free players we need to keep them up. But he's perfectly entitled to do what he did.
Because if Jack Wadrell's career had taken another direction and he'd been successful, and the fans therefore have been wanting to keep him, they say give him a pay rise so he doesn't move on.
Absolutely, yeah, fair point.
And that's not a criticism of Sunderland fans, because we all operate in that same mentality towards players.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Valerie Eck, which is a great name, and also I can imagine somewhere in a Smiths lyric somewhere. That's a brilliant rhyme, Valerie Eck, isn't it? And Valerie has this question. It's a good one. A lot of ink has been spilled on the Championship playoff final being the richest game in football. As a fan of the lower league football, though, says Valerie, how do the other EFL playoff finals compare, as well as the National League? I'd imagine that some National League clubs may actually still be losing money regardless, depending on how much they spent getting over that hurdle.
Yes, I think it's a very good question, Valerie. I would say potentially this year, the fight for fifth place in the Premier League, or the potential Manchester United versus Spurs final in the Europa League, will be matching, if not exceeding, the financial benefits of winning the EFL Championship. But that's very much as an aside. I think we've got to prepare yourself, Valerie, to take off a lot of zeros here. If we take a look at the difference between League One and the Championship and the playoff final there, and congratulations to both Birmingham City and Wrexham, by the way, for promotion. They have been worthy winners. As somebody that's teaching one of the Wrexham players, I'd just like to say fantastically well done, Ollie. You've been a credit to yourself, of all in class, and also you've been a credit to your club this season. But from going from League One to the Championship, based on my figures, it's probably worth about £10 million. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of beef between the EFL and the Premier League in terms of the distribution of TV revenues. But there's an element of hypocrisy here, because if you actually take a look at the EFL's own TV deal, there's a big gap between the Championship and League One, because under the distribution deal, for every £100 that the EFL generates from both solidarity payments and its own TV deal, £80 of that goes to the 24 clubs in the Championship, and £20 of that goes to the clubs in League One and League Two, and that's split 12-8. So you're getting 6.5 times more money from finishing bottom of the Championship as compared to being top of League One. So the EFL can't really take a moral high ground in some of its criticism towards the Premier League. And it is a very complex issue, and I suspect we'll be talking about it in more depth on Thursday's show, when I suspect by then we will have official confirmation as to the chair of the Independent Football Regulator. The difference between League One and League Two, going back to what I've just been talking about, probably about £500,000 to £600,000. It's still a lot of money, because many of those clubs perhaps on total budgets of £4, £5, £6 million. So 10% is 10%. But it is noticeable that the gap between the National League and League Two is bigger than the gap between League Two and League One. And the reason for that is that the broadcast deal for the National League is not particularly generous. It's not a case of being generous. It's what the market feels it's worth, but there's not a big market for it. So based on my figures, I reckon the step up from the National League to League One is probably in the region of £900,000 to £1 million. So twice the difference between moving up from League Two to League One. Again, as we're giving out congratulations, huge congratulations to Truro Town for being Cornwall's first ever club in the fifth tier of English football. And considering that 12 months ago, they didn't even have a ground and they were paying home matches 190 miles from Truro, one hell of an achievement.
A great achievement. Yeah, well, you'll have upset Charlie Baker now, our TalkSport friend and Torquay United fan, who resigned to the playoffs. Talking of the broadcast deal in the playoffs, in the National League here, and I apologise, that's something else we'll be talking about on Thursday, because there's been a lot of anger about DAZN hiking the prices up going into the end of the season and the playoffs. So that's a story we'll definitely be talking about in some detail. Nigel Bennett has our penultimate story today. And it is an area we have covered before, Kieran. It's an area that football fans worry about all the time. Can clubs claim compensation, asked Nigel Bennett, from FIFA or the various FAs for any injuries suffered in international matches, over and above the usual standard payments paid for borrowing these players for the internationals?
The simple answer to this question it is a yes, Nigel. Both FIFA and UEFA and football associations effectively have a fund set aside to acknowledge this. Some players have done their ACLs whilst playing in the FIFA World Cup or in a UEFA competition. And it's an acknowledgement that the players do have full-time contracts of employment with individual clubs, and the clubs potentially are going to suffer. What is interesting, probably for me, but the compensation paid is compensation for wages. It's not compensation for, well, if he had played for us, we would have won this competition or we would have qualified for the Champions League. So it is very much linked to the direct costs being incurred by clubs during the period of time before that, whilst they are unable to play for the first team, as opposed to some sort of ancillary benefits, which are very difficult to quantify. And I think we've covered that when we've been looking at the compensation issues potentially payable. We've got the outstanding claim, of course, at present between Burnley and Everton. And should Manchester City lose their big case against the Premier League, the small case or the smaller case in terms of APT, now looks like it won't be heard until October. There will be quite a few Premier League clubs in contact with their legal counsel and saying, should we risk putting in for a compensation claim, because we would have won the Premier League, we would have qualified for Champions League, we would have done this, that and the other had Manchester City not had this financial advantage. But remember, Manchester City, innocent until proven otherwise. Okay, we are operating currently in this country under the rules of habeas corpus.
Rob Sawyer has our final question, Kieran, and it's an interesting take on the merchandising angle, if you like. And Rob Sawyer, take on angle is the same thing. It's a very clumsily constructed sentence there. I apologise, Rob. It's a very good question. Rob says, for many years, my club, Everton, has outsourced its retail and kit sourcing supply operations. In the case of the Toffees, it's done through Fanatics, formerly Kitbag, Are there many football clubs in the Premier League and Championship who prefer to go it alone, or do the overwhelming majority engage Fanatics or another provider for this sort of function? What are the pros and cons to the two approaches? For Everton, I understand that it de-risks their commercial activities, but the trade-off is that increased sales don't directly translate into increased revenue for the club.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, Rob, and I'm going to look at it from two angles. First of all, we might see a change in behaviour when it comes to the relationship that football clubs have and their retail outlets. And the reason why I say this is as follows. One of the unexpected consequences of clubs adopting or having to apply UEFA's squad cost control rules is that they can broadly spend 70% of their revenue on wages. Now, it's more complicated than that, but let's just start. So what is revenue? Revenue is money from your ticket sales. Revenue is money from broadcasting. Revenue is money from your commercial activities. Your commercial activities, sponsorship, commercial partners, and merchandise. There are two ways of determining the revenue that clubs generate from merchandise, because this is an issue that I have every time I talk to some of our friends up in Scotland. There is bragging rights, as we know, in the city of Glasgow, and in the city of Glasgow, coming second means coming nowhere. Those bragging rights are not just in relation to trophies. Every single aspect of expenditure and revenue is discussed at great length between the fans of both Celtic and Rangers. But one of the differences between Celtic and Rangers is as follows. Celtic sell their own merchandise. So therefore, if I go into the Celtic megastore and I spend £100, Celtic register that as £100 of revenue, which means that for UEFA purposes, they can spend 70% of that on wages. Rangers have outsourced their retail activities to, I don't know whether it is Fanatics, Kitback, or whatever. So they just get their commission. So let's say that their commission is 20%. So from Rangers' point of view, the Rangers megastore sells £100, but because it's being managed by Fanatics, or whoever the partner happens to be, Rangers can only show their share of that, which is £20. So therefore, they can only spend 70% of £20, which is £14 on their costs, which puts them at a significant disadvantage. So I think we could see a switch away from clubs using these third parties towards running their own, not because they think it's the best thing to do strategically, but it's the best thing to do when factoring in the UEFA rules. So that's the first point to make. The second point to make is if anybody has ever studied business strategy, I used to be an examiner for a subject called business strategy. We've got something called Porter's forces, and there's a very famous academic economist called Michael Porter. And Porter often used to talk about companies sticking to the knitting. And what do we mean by that? Sticking to the knitting is where a business is encouraged to concentrate on what we refer to as its core competencies. So, Kevin, you are an experienced and excellent writer and comedian. So therefore, should you say, if I've got a couple of days when I'm not doing much next week, should I try to be a plumber? The answer is no, because it's taking you away from your core competencies. So what sticking to the knitting means is that football clubs should focus on being football clubs. They should avoid diversification. If I am a good director of football, if I am a good chief executive of a football club, does that mean by definition I'm therefore good at marketing kit, that I'm good at identifying supply chains when it comes to ordering merchandise so that we don't have any big gaps during the season when there's nothing on the shelves? Well, the answer is no. So there's a view that football clubs should spend their time maximising their expertise on being good football clubs, and the diversification issues, the peripheral issues, that's when you hire somebody else in who is an expert in that particular field. If it's in the world of retail sales of clothing, Then you find a retail clothing expertise organisation. You say, come and run our superstore. We'll take this commission. You get on with it. And if you think about what happens at football clubs, this happens a lot of the time. Who does the security at Palace? Who does the catering at our football clubs and so on? It tends to go to the specialist security organisations or caterers and so on, rather than the club going, how does this cooker work for pies? What happens if it breaks down? What do we do? Right, we've got caterers for that. So this is a cause for concern for me, because under the present rules, I think it's going to encourage clubs, in order to satisfy the cost control rules, and the Premier League is constantly talking about unintended consequences, that clubs will end up doing things which they're not really set up for, and which, me as a fan, what do I care about most of all? Good recruitment of players, good recruitment of manager, good football.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I did actually work as a plumber's mate for a year.
Did you? Cool.
After being thrown out of university. He wasn't a very good plumber either. So most of my job entailed going, no, it's still leaking.
Right.
And also I'm ashamed to say that he paid me in lead, which at the time was worth a fortune.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my week telling old people that lead pipes were now illegal and they'd have to come out.
Oh, wow.
Just put a bit of plastic in. They didn't know the difference, essentially. Lead was worth a fortune back in those days.
Well, just if you're doing it now, you'd be rolling it.
Well, I mean, imagine that, me and Uncle Terry, him up on the church roof, as sitcom criminals apparently used to do back in the 50s and 60s. Imagine that, Nick. I don't remember any church that had massive holes in the roof because somebody had been up there nicking the lead, but every sitcom you saw. Thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page, and anyone who's now joined the brand new Price of Football Club. If you'd like to join that club too and get ad-free listening and invite to our monthly Q&A sessions, bonus episodes, one of which we're about to record, and more, go to our website, priceoffootball.com. If you have questions you'd like answers on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on X and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy one of our excellent books, or, and it's back, Be Still My Beating Heart, a Price of Football
Have
t-shirt.
we got the Wembley 2 2025 edition of the t-shirts?
Oh, my whole of yesterday flashed before my eyes then, Kieran. You can find... I've got a bruise the size of a dinner plate on my arm, an unexplained pain in my left calf.
That probably was the tattoo.
There might be, my better chat, mate. I don't know. I don't know where they came from, but they were worth it. You can find all the details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back with the Thursday news pod that Kieran mentioned. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you, as always. Thank you to all the question writers as well. I mean, first of all, it gives me something to research, which I genuinely enjoy doing. And I learn, and certainly the feedback we get from other listeners is that in many respects they prefer the question show to the news show, because they go, God, I've been thinking that, but I couldn't get around. Couldn't be asked to write the question. Somebody's done it for me. So that's absolutely. So we really appreciate the support. And I did speak to producer guy, and he said that the the queue is now down to just 7 months.
Oh, great.
It was 8, it's down to 7.
Well,
So I think the additional episodes we've been doing have made a contribution. And that's one way you can support the show. Look, time to type, folks. We will never we will never say you should go down the Price of Football Club route. It's simply just an opportunity for us to do a little bit more. And we feel that is, it does have some monetary value. But the core competencies of this show are the 2 shows. But there is a way that you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. It genuinely helps. That feedback it improves our position in the algorithms, and with the big corporates now coming into the world of podcasts, we're struggling to keep our voices heard. Although we are very niche, by all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say on your review. You can even say you would rather have the show presented by Justin Morehouse and Swiss Ramble, or as producer Guy says, Plan A. And it wouldn't make a bit of difference to us. Honest.
Yeah, you say that, Kieran, but I don't know if I was pleased or annoyed at the amount of social media messages we got yesterday, which were saying, well, Kevin obviously will be disappearing for the next couple of days. So finally we get a chance to explore some of those other options that Kieran mentions at the end. I don't know if that was an insult or a compliment. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.